I want to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting our session today from Mohkinstsis. I respectfully acknowledge that we are coming together from across Alberta on Treaty 6, 7, and 8 territories, the traditional lands of First Nations, Métis and Inuit people, and everyone that's joining us today from across Turtle Island. We want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. It's important to recognize those who have lived on this land before us and learn from them about how we can live as a harmonious community with each other and with the land. Welcome, I think for the third or fourth time. I'm Jess, pronouns she, her, the program manager at Alberta Music. I'm joined by our communications and membership coordinator, Asma Schmidt, and our executive director, Carly Klassen. Alberta Music is here to support artists and the entire music ecosystem within Alberta. The best way to keep in touch with us about what's next is on our Instagram and via our bi-weekly newsletter. Today, we're hosting our first conversation in partnership with Breaking Down Racial Barriers. We'll also be hosting a second conversation that we would love to see you at on June 1st at 6 p.m. So if you registered today, you will get a link for Thursday, and we'll also send you the right one for Thursday. We have another series of panelists joining us on Thursday to continue having these key conversations on anti-Black and systemic racism in the music community. And now I think that's enough from me on my end for the time being. David, if you would like to take the stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. I'm happy everybody's here now. we finally got this up and going. It's awesome. I want to start by just first and foremost, I love to make sure that the chat room is working in some way or another. So if somebody can maybe even say something in the chat room, if it doesn't work, then we'll know right away. And if it does, if anything, maybe even in the Q&A or something like that, but love to make sure that that is up and going. And then I would like to start by just basically saying, I'm David Click Cox, and I'm part of Breaking Down Racial Barriers. And we're really thankful that Alberta Music is working with us for this opportunity to have this much needed conversation today. Give you a little background about myself. I've been in the music industry for over 30 years, and actually it all started in Alberta. My first hip hop, I actually had a hip hop radio show on CGSR in Edmonton. My first hip hop concert ever was in Calgary, and that was Ice-T. And I was part of a hip hop group called The Maximum Definitive. We were nominated for Best Rap at the Junos in 1993 and won a Much Music Video Award. From there, I went on to wearing many different hats, including promoter. I was an A&R guy for Universal Music, being an artist manager, and just, I guess you could say, like I said, I've worn a lot of different hats, and I still do. I'm excited to share this space because Alberta is important to me. It's part of me. And I'd like to help facilitate this convo to make change and build a stronger industry for the Black community in Alberta. So how did we get here? In 2020, when the murder of George Floyd happened, we partnered up with the organization's Canadian Independent Music Association and the newly formed Advance to hold roundtable conversations very similar to the one we're having today. From those conversations came a BDRB report on anti-Black racism in the music industry in Canada. We also had a declaration signing that had about 500 different companies and organizations and individuals from across Canada sign that declaration. And we've been able to implement training, policy change, influence the industry through some of these actions. And we hope to do the same today, starting with this conversation. And, especially focusing specifically on Alberta music industry and the Black community. And to do that, we have some amazing individuals that are with us today. I'm going to ask my partner, Ian, to share the BDRB report in the chat room, share the declarations so all of you can get familiar with that. And we will be recording this session so that it can be viewed publicly at a later date. All right. So I'm going to start by asking Natalie to turn on a camera and join us in this conversation and give everybody here a brief brief introduction of yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Tate. I am the Program and Development Manager with the TD Edmonton International Jazz Festival here in Edmonton. I've been in the music industry for a long time. I was singer at first, then I added on some arts admin roles. I've worked with various arts organizations, including Global Country, the Provincial Music Organization, now known as Alberta Music, but this was way back when. I also have taken on my current role with the Jazz Festival. I've done a lot of things. I take on a lot of tasks, from grant writing to helping out with the programs and program development, governance, social media, all that kind of stuff. So that's me. I was recently the chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion subcommittee of the Junos host committee when they were here. That was a great experience. A lot of great things came from that, a lot of things learned. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next up, I'd like to invite Nilo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nilo. I am an entrepreneur, owner, artist, and manager. So I own a space called Aphrodisiac Shop. That space in Edmonton is a rehearsal space, and in some cases a show space for a lot of the Edmonton arts community. Additionally, I manage a band called Bliss Band, which I play percussion in, and I have a radio show and a magazine as well. So it's kind of a lot, right? But sort of in the arts and music space all around in Edmonton.
Awesome. Thank you. And I actually had the opportunity to come by your space during the Junos. It was awesome. I'm going to invite Femi to the stage. If you can turn your camera on, that'd be awesome.
Hi, everyone. It's Femi here, Femi Bode George, and I'm the director and vibe curator at Icarus Sound. And I've been running Icarus Sound now for about 5 years, primarily in Calgary. And the reason why I got into entertainment was I actually noticed a gap in the level of production of social events, specifically for Black people, and the accessibility that was available at the time. And when I had the opportunity, I jumped into it, and I haven't looked back ever since. And ever since then, we've been able to work with about 20 venues in the city of Calgary that have never had Black events before. And we continue to strive to, break down more of those barriers and create space for people of color to access these venues. And last year, we were able to create the first fully Black produced show in a Stampede tent for the first time in its 110-year history. So that was a really awesome milestone. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And lastly, Moraine and Natalie and Nilo, please feel free to leave your cameras on. Let's stay active here. Thank you.
Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Moraine. I see a lot of friends and family in the chat. So what's up, everyone? I'm a hip hop artist from Edmonton, Alberta. I've been doing music for about a decade or so. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to grow up in Edmonton and kind of represent for Edmonton nationally and abroad. And I try my best to always highlight how much talent comes out of here and how much we're missing the spotlight. And I try my best to kind of bring that spotlight back here with me to Edmonton always. I started doing music, and I was fortunate enough to have people in the community like Arlo Maverick and Bert Richards, the Music from Mavericks team, that kind of took me under their wing and mentored me. Yeah, and I had a group of my brothers called the Overachievers. I have a very long history. I could go on forever. But yeah, anyways, my name is Moraine, and some of you guys know me, and I know a lot of you. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to introduce my partner here, Ian Andre Espinay, to the conversation as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ian Andre Espinay, and I am a 20+ year veteran of the music industry, most notably working in the live space. I am the co-founder of Breaking Down Racial Barriers, which was established in an effort to create equity in the music and creative industries in Canada. We're a little bit behind today, so I'm gonna jump right back to Click and let's get right in.
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing we really would like to establish and talk about is, I guess, the lay of the land in Alberta. Today's conversation is really about diving into the Black experience, be it if you're an artist, be it if you're a professional, whatever role that you play in the ecosystem of the music industry in Alberta. And it's important to answer some questions to understand the lay of the land. And obviously speaking from your experiences, be it like if you live in Edmonton, but we all know living in Alberta, you get around. Like, I know I got around when I lived there. You know what I mean? Like, I went to Calgary, I went to Red Deer, I went to Sylvan Lake. You know what I mean? We all get around. We go to Jasper, we go to Banff. You know what I mean? So I also ask you to wear your hat of the vision of the landscape of Alberta. If you have any experience at all outside of where you live, bring that to the table. And so the first thing is just diving into representation and just talking about what representation looks like in Alberta. Is where do you guys see a lack of seeing yourself, for one, in this industry that we call the music business? And that could be many different arenas. It could be music festivals, it could be boards of different organizations that exist, venues, all the way down to promoters, the staff. Let's just start there. I'd love to hear from you guys where you feel like you might be missing, where you don't feel like you're seeing yourself in the industry there. I'll go to Natalie first. I'll throw it at you.
Picking on me.
Yeah. Ladies first. Ladies first.
All right. I think all of the above. We're seeing it's way more than it used to be. But I don't necessarily see a lot of people of color on boards. I know that there's an effort and they're searching for people who will commit and offer their advice and their support in that way. It's to be honest, there's not a lot.
Anybody else want to jump in and add? What about you, Femi, being from Calgary? What do you see out there?
I think, I agree 100% with Natalie, and it's all of the above, from the boards of different organizations to the list of performers at certain festivals. And I look at it, I'm like, this is, these guys know better at this point. There's a lack of intention, I feel, when certain festivals are created or certain events are created, and a lot of people miss out on that. A lot of talented musicians and artists.
Can I just, yeah, I want to say that you don't really have to go as far as festivals. Like, this year was the first time that I was able to really be a part of and attend the Junos, thanks to Advance Canada. Thank you so much, Click, for that. But the Junos that I attended was pretty much the one that is not on TV, not televised. And the buzz, the real quiet buzz, is oh, this is the part that nobody really cares about, So we get together, we do this thing. That's the part that's not on TV. But if I'm really honest with you, I never saw myself in the Junos before that day. And that, not televised, not highlighted, was reggae, R&B, hip hop, songwriters, Indigenous, contemporary Indigenous, blues, like a lot of the Junos we won were actually in that untelevised night, and a lot of anything that was like culture based. Now, with the exception of like the performance part of it, like just kind of being on stage and performing, with the exception of that, mostly anything to do with Black, BIPOC, anything that was like non-white essentially, and what's traditionally considered quote unquote Canadian, that was all on the untelevised nights. So I think that it's fair to say that when we don't see ourselves in representations on these boards or at these festivals, but at the highest level of music in Canada, we're on the off night. That technically they would say nobody really cares about this group of people, right? Because it's the untelevised bit. But to be honest, I think that the Junos is missing out such a wicked opportunity, because those are the people who are actually going to make your show popular, actually.
Can I interrupt and just want to, I want to bring it back to focus a little bit on on the Alberta scene in terms of the spaces that you guys are operating in. Obviously, the Junos is a national run organization and it's national, and there's a lot of politics but I'm curious, like, since you're talking about award shows, there are Alberta based award shows, right? What about those ones? Like, do you feel like there's a presence or an outreach, or I'd love to hear the insight from that perspective. Maureen, do you have any thought,
Yeah, I think for award shows, we have like a few cool organizations, like there's the Calgary Music Awards, there's the Edmonton Music Awards. It's not like these things don't exist, they exist, but I think there's a misconnection between the organizations, and that's again due to misrepresentation of the community being in those boards. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of misconnections, and there's no there could be like better outreach, or I feel like a lot of people in the hip hop space or in the Black culture space are not very aware of these things, so they don't go forward and apply. Same thing with the Western Canadian Music Awards. There's a lot of things that are already here and in place to set us up for success as talents coming out of Alberta. But I think it's just there's a big misconnection between us and the industry. And yeah, I think we're also missing, and like just to go a little bit back a little bit, sorry guys, but I think even in spaces like not just boards, but there's also like festivals, there's not a lot of representation of Alberta-based musicians in some of these like larger festivals that are put on by big promoters, you know what I mean? And I see a lot of import that happens from elsewhere in the States, but I think there's room for Alberta talents, because the caliber of Alberta talent has leveled up over the years, for sure. Yeah, and also like even like spaces like nightclubs or bars, I always walk into clubs and I see like a white DJ or a Filipino DJ. And like they're amazing and talented people and DJs, but I'm like, they spin off Black music and stuff too, you know what I mean? Which is cool, you know, but I'm like, I feel like there could also be room. It's not like we lack DJs and we lack the talents to be in these, to take up these spaces.
I think he's definitely right in saying that there's the disconnect in the outreach. We don't all access the information the same. If we're not a member of a certain organization or signed up to a certain newsletter or following somebody on social media, we might not get that information. And I also find, and I can speak from my experience even with the Jazz Festival, is often people aren't applying. And if a festival or an organization has a process, you got to follow the process in order to be seen or to be considered. And if you're not putting yourself into that position, then there's a struggle. But on the other hand, you might not feel like you're qualified or going to be considered anyways, or you have a right space, or if you fit into that festival. Like for the Jazz Festival, how many Black jazz musicians are there in Edmonton that have a jazz group that are going to apply? I've reached out to people, even just, I said, even whatever project you're working on, just put it in because it may be considered, right? And the follow-up isn't always great. There are some people who are always on top of that thing, but sometimes it's just, you might not feel comfortable applying or feel that you'll actually get considered.
So I'd like to intervene for a moment because I always like to ask a question behind a question. So in the event that people do not feel as though they belong in a space, that may speak to an outreach issue on the part of the organizations. I want to be very careful not to victim blame and, because there's a possibility and a high probability that people who do not feel comfortable in spaces don't feel comfortable in those spaces because they haven't been welcomed there in the past. So the example that I like to use is, it's often said that Black people can't swim, but we were not allowed to swim in public swimming pools until a certain date. Consequently, we didn't learn to swim. And those individuals, through colonial practice, who did go to swim, other Black people were like, why are you doing that white person thing? Right. So I want to be very careful to ensure that we speak to the institutions and the systemics that are behind the issues in those institutions and try to find solutions for those. Sorry.
Yeah.
Moraine?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ian on that one. I think a lot of I think this is where I feel like companies and organizations should kind of take a little bit of responsibility in terms when it comes to the outreach. Is I think we're missing not just the misconnection, but more panels like this and mentorship programs to show these people that this is how you can enter our companies, but there's no clear idea, like there's no clear way. Like for me, I was lucky enough, like I said, I was able to have people that kind of mentored me. So I think more of discussions like this is what's needed, and also like direct maybe more panels that are open, say, like to the public and people that are interested in being in the music industry that are behind the scenes.
Okay, so let's talk about representation for a moment. Boards of MIAs, of organizations that you guys are speaking about, what do you see the representation on those boards being like? One Black person on a board can change the direction or the directive of an organization. Two can actually have a voice because one is often concerned about speaking up and being silenced. So, in these organizations that you're speaking of, how do you see representation? And, Maureen, you spoke to live venues, decision makers, managers, owners, infrastructural kind of things like that, juries, judging. So I always like to ask the question behind the question. If there are not people on the juries, why are those people not on the juries? If people are not applying for the juries, what is the reason for that? And then beyond that, what are the questions and who created the questions, etc.?
So what's your question?
The question is, how do you see representation in Alberta? Do you see a large number of Black people on boards and in decision-making places? And how do you see those kind of things changing in terms of outreach? Is it the creation of ambassadors? What do you see in terms of processes by which these organizations can reach into these communities, go into those communities and get people to start to build trust to come in?
Well, I could probably start. And what I find so far, 2-3 years in, when I really got into it, is a lot of these organizations are run by people who are really, it's like they're small circles. And if you're not in those circles, you don't exist. So it's a two-way street as well, I would say. The people who have the knowledge that they can share between them and also the organizations, but the organizations themselves have to be intentional about how they're creating that change, because there's a lot of amazing musicians here, artists that are invisible to them, to these organizations. And building that gap, these boards need to have some level of change, you know, and having people from our community that know how to reach the right people or get the knowledge out, because it's a knowledge gap, really, right, between the decision makers and the community. But you need to have certain people on those boards, and a lot of these boards lack any diversity as of now, you know, and making those changes could really move things along very quickly.
And so how do you see that? Do you see it as the creation of a dedicated seat? Do you see it as, you know, again, I mentioned like ambassadors that go into the community to reach out? Do you see it as them coming into the community to do programming or advertising in Black media, etc.? Like, what do you see those solutions as?
You know, even if you have one member on the board, it might not be as effective as another, because their voice could get drowned out. You know, it has to be almost like a mandate. You know, the intention has to be there. You could have one, you could have two, but if the change is not happening, they're not being effective. So I would say, just like as you alluded to, having those mandates in their programming, their yearly programming, that we have to get so and so done. You know, so having real intention behind it. Because out here, what I've noticed is there's a lot of things people might say they're doing, but you don't really see the action or the end results of it. So having result-based programming, by the end of this quarter, by the end of this year, we want to have done X, Y, Z. You know, having measurable goals that can be put on, I feel that would really, really help.
Which leads to a very, sorry, Click, go ahead.
Okay. I saw Nilo had her. She was trying to say something from
I'm sorry,
before.
Nilo.
Just
I
wanted
didn't.
to bring her in the mix.
It's okay, but what I found that has happened in Alberta, I know we're talking about like getting a seat at this table that already exists or what have you, but a lot of things that has happened in Alberta is there's been a pop-up of a number of different Black awards, like programs or shows. So there's a lot of different communities that have started their own awards programs. And I'm not really sure, like, I don't know if I have the answer exactly in terms of how that plays into like the larger conversation, but I do know that I don't think that the award shows that exist already can do the level of outreach that they need to do without whoever those people are that have started those other Black awards show, if that makes any sense. Like, that has to be, I don't know.
I think what you're trying to say is there needs to be built relationships built with even those other organizations that exist to build the kind of a what are we trying to say here, Ian? It's like a exchange of outreach within the community, support this event to support our event, and that type of relationship building can help build trust, for one, within the community. You know, I think that's part of it. I think that the other question, and I want to throw to you, Natalie, on this is, because you've sat on some of the boards, and I've sat on boards. Sometimes a lot of the boards come down to also like experience, like or the individuals that are have experience that come into the space. So when they're looking for representation, do we even have a pool to pull from? And if we don't, how do we then, like, what is your thoughts on, like, how do you build up the knowledge base and the experience base to be eligible to hold weight on a board? Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I understand what you're saying. And I don't know if we have the pool. I know there are many people that are doing their own thing, like Neela said. But at the same time, how do you get that experience? And part of that might come from shadowing, that might come from education, which not everybody is able to commit to, afford, or, you know, have that time to do. But at the same time, like, it's a tricky question, because a lot of it, like you said, is trust. Once you start those relationships and the connections, and you show people what you're able to do and what you're able to deliver, and what how you're able to connect with your community. And I love the ambassadors idea. I'm a big fan of that. Right, that's when you start, it's the relationships. When you're able to build a relationship, then people get to know you and learn from you. And that's when you may be able to start getting considered for those boards. I also talk a lot about the various circles that there are in the music industry, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's I've been in it for 30 years back from before the internet days, or whether it's you're playing in the club, or whether you're recording it. All these circles somehow need to connect and meet and support one another. And for us, a solution is so hard, but I do think mentorship, shadowing, and just trying to figure out ways to gain that experience is huge. That's not really an answer, but
Thank you. Maureen?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Natalie here. I think I don't think we lack the pool of people that are qualified or that could be potentially qualified to take up these positions. We live in a province that is like, I grew up with a lot of Black people, you know what I mean? And I know how many more people came and migrated over here to Alberta. There's a lot of students. There's a lot of students at Grammy QN, at U of A, U of C, Mount Royal, that are qualified to take up positions at these boards of organizations, or could potentially be qualified. I think they just need to know that, you can actually work here, you can actually make money, you can actually apply here, because they don't see themselves
that they'll be valued in the spaces that exist.
Yeah, exactly. That you can actually make a career out of this. There's marketing students, a lot of business students that are in marketing, that are in all across the board. You know what I mean? So I think there's definitely spaces. We just need to find a way to bridge the gap. Maybe a paid internship to some of these students, these Black students that are from these universities that are in these programs. Maybe that could help. You know what I'm saying? So I don't necessarily think we lack the people or the power, or like the amount of people, of Black people. They just need to see themselves in these spaces, and we just got to find a way to make sure that information gets to them.
Thank you.
gets to the next generation that are coming up.
Thank you.
That's what I find.
Yeah.
So to Nilo's point, to the organizations and the service providers that are watching, there should be absolutely no conversation about the Black community without the involvement of the Black community. To your point about the award shows, Nilo, there are people from the Black community and from the culture who must be consulted on the processes that you were trying to do, or otherwise there are conversations taking place which are trying to guess what it is that the Black community needs. And these kind of conversations are critical to that, key informant interviews, et cetera, are critical to that point. And to the point that Natalie was making earlier, a lot of this conversation that we're having is anecdotal. This is why we at BDRB push for the collection of race-based data. Is absolutely critical to this conversation, that we become able to assess the severity of the issues in Alberta by looking at the boards and saying, this is how many people we have on these boards, this is how many people we have in our membership. And to Femi's point, that which gets measured gets done. So that when we have this data now, we can say, okay, you know what, we do not have any representation in our organization. You know what? We have an outreach problem. What are we going to do? We're going to create ambassadors. We are going to advertise in Black media, etc. How bad is that outreach program? Okay, you know what? We are going to offer memberships to members of the community free for a certain amount of time. And if they do not come immediately, right? We are not going to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, we tried everything and they didn't come, because they haven't been there for 30 years or 50 years or whatever the case may be, and may not be comfortable. And to the point of someone in the chat, maybe we will get into the talk about infrastructure and community building of organizations in Black spaces, which run adjacent to organizations. Continue. Sorry, Click.
It's okay. No, that's great. We're going to move into economics within our communities. And before I do that, I just want to quickly just ask each and one of you, is there a solution that you feel that you want to just quickly say is you think would make a huge impact in the Alberta scene in terms of seeing more representation? Is there an idea, something you would like to share that you think would be great to be implemented into practices, policies, anything? Femi, you haven't said anything in a minute.
Creating a mandate, just tying back to what I said at the beginning, creating a measurable mandate, going into the planning for each year coming through, or even if it's a 5-year plan, but having measurable results in each step of that and how each organization can contribute to breaking these barriers down. I think that would help guide the way when you have the goal. Okay, how do we get to the goal? Not just adding people to the board. It's easy to do that, but nothing gets done. Okay, what are we going to achieve with the people that we brought on? How are we going to reach XYZ communities? That I feel would be more guided to achieving those goals over time.
I guess I want to add on to that. So to your point, I do think that a mandate is necessary, but I've also found that there's a lack of accountability in all of these processes, that like you can do a mandate, but then who cares if you don't fulfill that mandate? I think that the same way we have to fill out a million pieces of paperwork for grants, and then we have to be held accountable for the work that whatever that money we receive, we have to be held accountable for what that has done. I think that there has to be a representation of the population that's close to the population that you're serving. If Alberta, which I think is the Blackest province in the country at this point, but if Alberta has like 30% population, which goes back to race-based data collection, then your program, your music program, should be servicing this percentage within a standard deviation of whatever, in order to continue to be able to get that funding and get that grant. Because the mandates are great, but without an accountability and I guess follow the money on accountability, I don't like, what's the point essentially? Like it benefits everybody the way the system's currently working. I mean, the people who are running the system.
As quick solution, Natalie, on representation, what things could be done to help bring more representation, not just boards, but everywhere,
Yeah, no, I think ambassadors are a huge thing. Having someone that can go out and just mentor people and explain what is going on and where you can get the money, and teach people at whatever level they're at. There's been people around for 20, 30 years in the industry that know there's these funding organizations, that know there's these places to submit to get showcasing, but if the community isn't aware of that, then that might not help, and that's I think it just strengthens them. The more information you have, the stronger you are in whatever you're working on.
Thank you. Maureen?
Yeah, I think offering up spaces for also the younger Black youth, again, from that are skilled or on their way to that skill level, and just giving them a paid internship and showing them that there's space for them in that industry, and they'll shake things up by themselves. I know that.
I have one question before we get in. I'm just curious. In Alberta, do you guys find that there's any level of education about the music industry and the roles that exist for, let's say, junior high school students, Black students in Alberta?
Unless your teacher is involved with it, I don't think so.
Yeah, we just learned how to play the flute. That's the only music thing.
Just putting it out there that shows that there needs to be a level of education and resources provided to help lead people to what type of representation can exist, right?
If I'm honest, I'm not sure that we have the type of counseling in Alberta that even helps Black high school kids get into a proper stream of college, like, period. So I think that, yes, exactly what you said, but there's definitely a larger conversation right there in that.
Great. Ian, I'm going to ask you to lead this next conversation in regards to economics of
So-
anti-Black racism.
Yeah, so I think I'd love to hear from the panelists in your own voices how systemic racism looks in funding processes and in economics, in the ability to access sponsorship as a live event producer, the ability to get endorsements or bank funding or anything. How does racism look in Alberta in terms of economics, your ability to access grants, the amount that you get when you do access grants versus your peers, et cetera, et cetera?
I could probably take that one. What if I told you I've never used a grant? And a lot of that is because I never even had the information of how to access those grants till now. You know, and a lot of that's giving me PTSD of like, wow, if I knew this years ago, how different things would be now. You know, so there's definitely a huge knowledge gap on reaching people. And a lot of people have moved to Alberta of recent. A lot of talented musicians, artists, and people in film, but they have no idea what the system is like. Because if you're not in the traditional means of them reaching people with these organizations, you would never know. So definitely something has to be done with the media side of things on how the advertising of these grants are put out, so people know about them. You know, like if you're not in certain circles, you would never know they even exist. You know, so bridging that gap would let people know a lot more. And when it comes to sponsorships, I feel for the longest time, I think a Black audience was always looked at as one that you cannot sell anything to or sponsor certain brands to, you know, and that's due to a lack of data. I think we need to be able to collect data that shows the numbers of attendees that we're beginning to get, you know, and the sales that certain places make, the merch sales and everything, and the economic impact it has in those cities like Calgary, for example.
Also, I must imagine like your events are Black music, but it's not only Black people that show up to those events, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
So I think that's the other, like, do you deal with stereotypes thinking that your event is only catered, like a black event only is for Black people?
100%. 110,000%.
And how does that affect chasing the money to run an event, be it sponsorship or even, you know, if you run a magazine and you're trying to get an advertiser hint?
It's everything. It's everything. And that's why I'm very intentional about inviting leaders in different organizations to my events. I send them free tickets. I'm like, pull up, come to event, come experience what it's like. It's been years now. I come to all your stuff, but you never come out to what we do. Come experience it for yourself, because it's important for those decision makers to see what these events are like, right? And experience it for themselves. Because that now changes the conversation. That's another voice now that could help, that you could throw into the ring and be like, no, there's something here, you know. And I think there's still a huge lack of knowledge in how to access grants, funding, and sponsorships, you know, and having maybe more discussions like this where, you know, you have people from various organizations explaining to certain communities on how to go about applying for these grants or even how to secure sponsorships.
Thank you. Nilo, maybe speak a little bit about your magazine and maybe any chat, like, is there any challenges you face in, you know, running that magazine and getting funding or advertising dollars or any support, you know, especially when you feature like artists in those magazines and things like that?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is exactly what you just said with Femi, is that people feel like melanistic. Now we are a Black magazine, like written and produced by Black folks, and we try to make sure that the conversation that we're having is like a bunch of us having a conversation in a room together, free of white gaze specifically. So because of that, I think that oftentimes the material doesn't translate the same way. Obviously, like we're not necessarily writing in African American vernacular English, but there's like certain turns of phrases and there's certain like double speak that we can communicate to like a Black audience, and it doesn't necessarily translate in the same way to a white audience. The two things that I found, number one, is that when you have a quote unquote Black anything, the funding gets boiled down to whatever the diversity and equity stream is. So you're no longer considered in the, like, we're not considered major media. They've actually called us and had us change our grant applications from like a $25,000 funding stream to like a $3,000 diversity and equity funding stream. Those are direct things that have happened in terms of like running the website and things like that. So that is one thing that very much happens, is because that D&E stream exists, you kind of get pigeonholed into that stream. And then another thing that happens is that we do get funded, but we get funded at a minimum level. So it's kind of like a what do you got to lose amount, which usually is around $5,000. And then when you look at like your partners in the same, the Wear magazine, the Edifies, like those kind of folks, they're able to get more of like a 10 to 15 to 20 M plus $1,000 like funding from the same organizations, because they fall under media and not under diversity and equity, if that makes any sense. So
Thank you, Ian. You're muted, Ian.
So I think that you said some things that are very, very key there, and that I'd like to highlight. One of which being is that, and we talk about being typecast into certain spaces, often musically and otherwise, but Black companies and Black organizations can be considered both. It's not a zero-sum game, where when you have a diversity stream, quote unquote, they can't be considered for other streams. And I think that that's a critical point, because, and I want to throw back to Nilo and ask the importance of things like siloed funding, for instance, that specifically take you out of competition and specifically create opportunities for those who have been disadvantaged. And maybe you can speak to how core funding versus like project funding that comes in, like we want to do this, we want to do that, but we don't have staff regularly or things of that sort might come into play.
yeah, so the challenge with a lot of us, like who are working in that stream, is that as far as talent goes, whether it be writers or talent to like run the business itself, you can't necessarily like just quote unquote find anybody. Like it's not that kind of a situation. So it's actually even more important that we retain the talent that we have. For me so far, to be honest with you, I have not had the opportunity to access what has been called core funding. So we have kind of been very much chasing the ball with project funding, which means that you're like always producing, always trying to do something. And it actually takes quite a bit of resources out of sort of rooting in and establishing your organization in that way. And maybe this goes to Femi's point that even though I'm accessing funding, I don't even know where to access core funding from. Like, we did start a nonprofit because my for-profit business was actually losing a lot of money doing a lot of the events that we were doing for the community. But even to like how to build the board, what types of things should we do, and starting finding core funding, we have no idea. Like, we're very much trying to figure it out in terms of webinars and what have you. So that core funding piece is definitely missing from the conversation.
So I want to follow up with a quick question about barriers. You mentioned creating a nonprofit organization in order to access. Are there barriers such as incorporation that are things that are in your way when you're trying to apply for a grant that might block you? You must have this much income, or you must have this many employees, or things of that sort. And part two to that question, I want to ask about the amount of time that it takes you for you to fill out grant applications versus your peers who may have an accountant who is on staff full time, and what that does in impact and how that impacts your business as a whole.
Yeah, so I am my peers who has an accountant on staff. So, yeah, I do have somebody on staff who like looks for that funding and sees if we're eligible and applies, but she's also an immigrant like the rest of us. So she has there are barriers in terms of systemic barriers, like how the system is actually working and how it's actually working for us. We have been literally taken out of one kind of funding stream and put into another. But additionally, the amount of time that it takes for her to do that, like, it's a significant chunk of the job that she does or the work that she does. And starting nonprofits is freaking expensive. Like, it is expensive. So everything from the lawyer, time, like all of these things to make sure your bylaws are good, and making sure that you're doing it right, essentially, like in a principled way. All of that is challenging, including having the knowledge gap in terms of how to do that effectively. I just the other day found out that there's other ways to like lead an organization other than a board. Like, you don't have to have a board. To now, I don't even know what that is. I haven't done that research yet, but it's like I'm like literally replicating the things I've already seen. And I think maybe there are other systems that we need to explore. Just before we get into another question, Morain's had his hand up, and I like so want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah. Well, I definitely is about to throw to Morain, but I also wanted to plant a seed before he says something, so maybe it can tie back into where you're gonna go with this conversation. Being that you're the artists here and talking about funding, and I know that you've had some success in getting funding. I'd love to hear what the barriers that you still have challenged in accessing funding and going after funding, and what specifically that those type of funds are and what you believe the challenges are. And two, another question I added on to that is maybe you could share, do you feel as a Black artist, you are receiving the same type of funds as your counterparts when you're being booked for shows and things of that nature? Like, this is all economics and fund and money we're talking about here. Do you feel like you're treated equal?
No. No. I've been, like I said, I've been doing music for a very very long time, and I haven't had any success with funding. Yes, I have, but I haven't had any success with funding until recently. That's over a decade of doing music. Okay. The only funding that I was able to access and get was an equity and access grant. You know what I'm saying? Which now doesn't make me necessarily feel valued. It just makes me feel that I'm a checkbox. You know what I'm saying? Which is cool. You know what I'm saying? I get the funding. I get to use it to pursue my music. But I feel like, okay, what was so different throughout all these years of me doing music that now I can access the funding? Is it the fact that now my funding was sent in by my manager and my label team who are white? You know what I'm saying? because I know my manager, before I was able to get some of these grants, before I just get rejected and I just be like, oh, well, I'll try next year. Where with my manager, she was able to, shout out to Rebecca, but she was able to actually call these organizations. I'm like, what are you doing? She calls, why did Moraine not get this grant? What are you talking about? I didn't know you were able to do such a thing. You know what I'm saying? And then when I do get the grants, again, I said it's just, it feels like a checkbox. You know what I'm saying? And like, if I was able to get some of the other grants, like just for being an artist and not just being a Black person, just for being an artist and my art can compete, you know what I'm saying? How far ahead would I be able to be in my career now, being a decade in, you know what I'm saying? Where I know like other artists that from different genres who are able to access some of these funds way prior than I have, you know what I'm saying? And it's just, it's very frustrating, you know? And there's other streams of funding that are not grants, that are like ran off of competitions and showcases and stuff like that, where people are able to get like thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars that are catered to like one specific genre, you know what I'm saying? And we never had that in the Black music space, you know? So as, let's say like a country artist, if you're able to get $100,000 to start your career, if I was able to get such a thing as a hip hop artist to start my career, $100,000, I'd go a very long way. That'll go a very long way. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Natalie,
Yeah.
do you want to chime in on this real quick?
I know I'm not saying much, but just hearing Moraine say that, it's just disheartening, because honestly, there are a lot of artists that, whether it's through the application process or the jury process, or just in general, just decisions that were made by a select group of people, didn't get that help that they could have. And it also affects just how they feel about themselves. Like, to feel like a checkbox it's not okay, right? It's not. And I've always been curious if those applications were viewed in some place like Toronto or maybe even Vancouver, would they have gotten the same result? Is that because it was juried here, or is it, who knows what happens? But I know that there are some grants. I know one arts organization that is doing all they can to, support, and I think it's the program he mentioned, just helping, get artists into that process and get them into the know. And the grant advisors are awesome at answering questions and love to hear the different ideas, and they really want to support. And I encourage everyone just to even call them and talk about what you've got going on. And there's a part of me that's like, well, the money's there, so go for it, take it, and then see what you can do with it. But like Moraine said, it's like, yeah, you kind of do feel like a checkbox. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Sorry, Natalie. So I heard a potential solution in there, and I want you to extrapolate. Do you think
Yep.
that there's a possibility that there is a solution in jurying grants from Alberta outside of Alberta, like utilizing
Certain disciplines, possibly, I do, because you need the right people that know the industry, that know the culture, that know how this product that they're listening to, how this project that's being described is going to work, if it's going to work or not, right? Like a hip hop artist that wants to tour Canada or tour Europe or do something like that, you never know who's going to end up on a jury, who's going to be selected to do that, and they might not grasp the entire project. But yeah, that might be a solution.
Well,
Or bring people in.
You're 100% right about you'll never know who's on a jury. I mean, I managed an artist from Calgary at one point, and it's because I discovered him on a jury. You know what I mean? So I was sitting on a jury, and I never would have heard of that artist if I never was on that jury.
Right.
So and there is a point of having influential people in the industry pay attention to, you know,
Yeah,
that process, you know, and how it can actually elevate an artist from Alberta
sure.
in the overall industry outside of Alberta. Do you know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep. Even in the feedback that they get, because sometimes you give feedback on a jury, right? That can be helpful too.
Femi, real quickly.
Yes. I feel a lot of people get into the creative space, especially the Black people, because they have a deep sense of passion for what they're creating, right? Without, essentially what I'm getting at is this. A lot of people, we all do all these various events, live music shows and whatnot, but we don't collect the data. Having that data is a lot of power, because that's where you can really show the economic value that you're bringing. You know, so what I'm beginning to realize is a lot of people are coming into Calgary and Edmonton from surrounding areas, Winnipeg, Sask, and, you know, probably further different places in Alberta, be it Lethbridge, and being able to collect that data, like how many people are coming into the city, how many people attended the events, how are the venues doing? Having that data is like gold, because I feel that's what would also help us convince a lot of these Jews, like, there's a lot of economic power in what we're doing, you know, and showing that these things actually contribute to the economy of the entire province of Alberta. It's key, and I feel that is lacking seriously, being able to really show that economic weight. You know, I did an event last week and over 700 people showed up. You know, there was a large population of those people that came from Edmonton. Some of them came from Sask, some from Ontario, some as far as Montreal.
That's great.
You know, and being able to have that information after everything that we do is very key, I feel. And even I myself, it's now I'm beginning to start to collect that data and have it, you know, in a database, and just keeping that, you know, and have those numbers.
Moraine?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Femi on that one. And I think again, like even when we do apply for these grants as artists, I think that data is very important to just, you know, showcase your impact, you know what I mean? But I also like, there's also I'm gonna tap into you guys' space, Femi, a little bit here, but because I used to also like, I found myself not getting in enough shows earlier in my days where I was forced to obviously become, and that's natural, become my own promoter and throw my own shows and throw my own events. But I also found that going to venues back in the days, it's, I don't know how it is now because I'm not throwing as many events, but events would tell me that they don't do hip hop music, right? Which is cool if they don't do hip hop music, but all of a sudden they're importing so-and-so A-list or B-list from another city, from the States. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, well, I thought you guys don't do hip hop shows. What's different from my hip hop show and the hip hop show that you guys are now promoting and presenting? So I'm like, is my hip hop not welcomed here? But my music, when it's time for you to exploit my craft and my people's music, it's okay. You know what I'm saying? So, and I'm not using it to complain. I'm just saying, like, these are some of the things where I'm like, okay, is there a way we can hold even venues accountable? I know some people that are able to get venues without a fee, but when I show up as a hip hop artist, they want to ask me for a specific fee to rent the venue. You know, I'm fortunate I never had to pay for a fee to log in an event, but I know people do. You know what I mean? But it's like, it's just because the name, or it's because you built the thing, and that's where data is important. You're right, Femi.
I know in Edmonton, that is something that's sort of lacking, is a space for urban music or for these acts, these artists to play. There's tons of venues around, but I'm a believer that sometimes you got to put the music in the right space. And I don't know if we have the right spaces for what we need all the time.
I'll be
Yeah,
there.
you can't go see the game, like go watch the game concert at Durant, you know? It's like, but the same club, I'll go the next day and they won't let me in the club, right?
So quick though, that's a challenge because Moraine, like throughout the community, especially in Alberta. So number one, I want to say the aphrodisiac is available for everybody on here who's looking for not only rehearsal space, but show space. Like you're not going to get a 700 people in there, Femi, so no. But if you're like in the 100, 150, 200 space, a thing that I was involved with in New York was called End of the Week, where there was a literal hip hop rehearsal space that gave people a safe place to come and get their like stage presence, like be able to DJ and like have an audience in front of them, like a practice space, literally.
That's cool.
So that is definitely something that we are good for. We do have music equipment there already, so consider it. But that's just a quick plug. So the other thing that I wanted to say is the challenge is that in Alberta, we all benefit from white proximity. So if you decide that you're going to deal with Black vendors and a Black manager and a Black whatever, you're going to lose out on opportunities the way things exist right now. Because to Moraine's point, I cannot navigate some of the spaces that his white manager could navigate here in Edmonton. You know, it's like almost sending a white person to buy the movie ticket for you.
Yes. Well, Nilo, if you can please put maybe a link in the chat for aphrodisiac, just so everybody knows where it is. I just have a quick, Ian, I'm just going to ask everybody a quick question. Don't give me long answers, just yes and no. During doing this process, I called tons of people, a lot of people. I asked a lot of research, but I still want to ask here. Do all of you see Black lawyers in Alberta at all? Yes or no? Do you know of any
Yes.
in the space?
No.
In entertainment lawyers, sorry. Let me be specific.
No.
Okay. 2, Black managers. Can you count more than 2 hands full of Black managers in Alberta?
No.
No.
Okay. Publicists. Black publicists. Can you count more than 1 hand of Black publicists in Alberta?
Nope.
Okay. Sound tech person, engineers, lighting techniques, live people. Can you count more than on 1 hand those people?
No. Maybe 1.
Not for each one.
Not in my circles. No.
Okay.
And not 2 hands, maybe 1 hand, but
Okay.
not.
Accountants that deal with entertainment, business managers, accountants. Can you count more than on 1 hand that is Black?
No.
Okay, so I bring this all up to say that there's obviously a lack of professionals that are Black in Alberta. And what do you believe? Like, can you speak about the funds that you believe are needed to support the development of the knowledge and learning capital that is needed within the Black community to build capacity to create a sustainable ecosystem? And what would that look like? What would be needed to be able to create that type of environment to uplift and build the next generation of these individuals that are needed?
I think they need to know
Mentorship.
what jobs, what roles there are in the industry, and then they need a place to be able to learn to do that. I know there are programs here. I know there are programs that people leave this city to go do, whether it's 2 years, 4 years, a year. But it's getting them to be aware of the roles and knowing where to go to learn.
All right.
I think incubator programs.
Yep.
Incubator programs that are going to teach multiple things, not just artists, but artist managers, how to become a lawyer, entertainment lawyer, how to become a music manager, and just, I think a full-on incubator program on the music industry that's focused on Black music.
Femi?
I think paying people what they're worth. A lot of people they look at music as a pastime, as, oh, you're just doing it on the side. And that's the general norm in Alberta, and that needs to change ASAP. You know, if you're putting a musician on for a concert, a show, anything, pay them what they're worth. Pay them like a professional, not like a weekend musician, so that they can actually make a living off of it. You know, secondly, we need to play more Alberta music on radio. More of the Black music that's created in Alberta needs to be played on the radio. We don't hear any of it, so people don't even hear them. You know, I feel that also helps, even the DJs themselves too. I myself, I DJ out here, so I do make it intentional. I'm like, I need your music. You know, there has to be some type of way to.
But how does that answer the question I had in regards to what is the solutions that you believe are needed to actually like what is the financial needs that need to be created to be able to train the next generation of FEMIs?
I think having incubators for sure, mentorship programs that show people that it's viable and you can actually make a living off of it.
Are those free incubators?
Has to be. It has to be, because you don't want, like, it's already as difficult right now for everyone with inflation and everything. It has to be free and intentional. Yes.
Nilo?
I think there has to be I think that there has to be I don't know how to navigate the gatekeeping process. Like I don't know how financially how money can help you navigate the gatekeeping process, but that might be the incubator conversation that we're having. I don't know what management looks like in Alberta outside of Black folks. Like how many entertainment lawyers are there in Alberta? So I guess to that point, yeah, there has to be like some kind of like fellowship, something or other in place.
Ian, I'm gonna let you chime in here.
No, I'm gonna, I think Moraine has his hand up, so.
Okay.
Sorry, I won't take too much, but I just think like incubators, but also an incubator, but if we can get some of these like key organizations that are also in charge of like these, I don't know, like whether it be at Live Nation or the Stampedes or KDs or Alberta Music, to also chime in, and not just financially, but with also like positions that are going to be available to some of these people who are going to be part of the incubator programs thereafter. How can they integrate and become part of the industry? And they have to offer up these positions for them.
Providing a path, basically. You go do the incubator and you've got these options to kind of take a look at.
So I think I'm going to add one little piece of commentary there in terms of this use of this word ally, an allyship, which is a word that's thrown around often. This is where you put your money where your mouth is in terms of mentorships, in terms of the creation of things which can actually put people in a position to succeed. I think we have to go into the Q&A because I think we're just...
Actually, I'd like to propose, just ask Alberta Music, because we started late and we really wanted to go till 8 and give time for Q&A. Is everybody available to stick around till at least 8:30 on your part? Yes? Nilo, if you have to leave early, you understand, but if the others can stick around, that would be nice. Thank you. I would like to jump, since this next conversation is really about media, I would like to get into is just the landscape of media in Alberta. Is there, like, you're kind of the only, and I might be wrong, there might be other spaces, but I don't know of any other Black spaces that cover Black, artists in Alberta. Are you the only outlet? Is there, I imagine there's influencers and content creators that exist in the social platform way, but as a traditional kind of media outlet, is there any other ones we should be aware of besides yourself?
I think Diversity Magazine has been in Alberta for a little while. They're very rooted in the African community quite specifically. And I think there's a magazine also called Ladies Corner as well that kind of, but I'm not sure how much they do in terms of artist spotlight. Probably like minimal, but in terms of like modern urban media, that we have a big Black people blanket, so we kind of try to do a little thing for everybody. I think that we might be the only ones that I know of that are occupying that space right now.
Is anybody else familiar with any Black owned led media outlets in Alberta? I'll take that as a no. So my question is there a lack of knowledge of genre roots, like genre adequate reporting and recognition of contributions of Black artists from Alberta in the media in Alberta?
I think overall in the media there is. I also do this weekend morning radio show that's on community radio as well. So I am also to be blamed for it. I think my very specific challenge is that it's hard to get radio edits specifically. And I think that that is a funding issue on the part of an artist. I think Moraine could probably go in there and bust out a whole album. But it would be much harder for him to go in there to bust out a whole album and then do it in radio edit and then do it a clean version and then do an instrumental. So there's about 5 copies of every single that you put out. So if you need it to be played on the radio, you're more likely going to push out a whole EP than pushing out 5 versions of the one song. So that's kind of what I see happening. Mike said 9 versions. So yeah, so I think that that's what I see happening for me, very specifically on the radio sense, because I have I've talked to Moraine directly, like I've tried face-to-face to get that work. That's not an excuse, but that is my very specific challenge. I think on the radio, all across the board, when they think about Canadian music, quote unquote, they sort of default to like the Biebers and the Drakes and kind of whatever.
Popular.
Easy, yeah, low-hanging fruit, I would call it, right? But overall, we try almost 1 or 2 times each magazine, and we only come out quarterly to highlight artists as well. And once we work on our web funding, we'll be able to like do more with artists. It's literally us, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to, don't mean to cut everybody off, but we have so much to cover, so I'm trying to get as much through as I can. So if I cut you guys off, please don't hate me. It's just to get to the point of certain things. But Moraine and Femi, do you feel like there's a lack of coverage? Is there a lack of coverage for your events, for your music? Do you feel like you're getting the equal attention as your counterparts?
No, zero. We get zero coverage. I mean, for example, you know, as significant as the Stampede event that I did last year with my team, there was zero coverage from Alberta, completely. It's like it didn't happen. And
that was because it was correct me if I'm right, that was at the Calgary Stampede, and was it a sold out event, and was it and you said it was the first time of its kind that they had a fully Black run led event, correct?
In the tent.
Tent.
Yes, because there's all these giant tents around the city, and that was probably the most Black people I've seen in one place in Calgary.
Sounds like a great story to me.
I was there. I'll attest to that. The event was very successful. There was a lot of people. I've had an amazing time. I'm sure a lot of people did, but yeah, I just heard about it. It's not like the media brought me there or it was promoted. I just showed up because obviously I'm just tuned in with my community, but that's about it.
I feel word of mouth is one of the strongest strongest communication tools that we have. If a friend knows or tells you about it.
Are there particular artists chosen to be amplified? Like based on what they represent, be it like sexualization or violence, or do you know what I mean? Like what their messaging is when it comes to what type of attention is given in the media?
I think no attention at all is given. And if anything is given, it's because those artists are in those circles where whoever the writer is knows them. If not, you're not being seen at all.
Or
You
if
know,
something went wrong.
Exactly. So we lack any form of media access. And
it's not like the media doesn't really have access to us, I think, because they had no problems finding me or other artists during the George Floyd murder. They found us somehow. So I'm like, okay, if they found us then, what? Now when Femi throws an event or when I release a song, why is it not? Where are they now? Why can't they find this? You know what I mean?
Are these is there an absence of Black journalists?
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely challenging to find writers, period, for the work that we do. And because it's FUBU based, like we want Black writers to write about Black issues, it is challenging. But maybe that's finding them, not necessarily that they're out there. They might just be on their blogs or what have you, but.
And do you guys feel it's important to have a Black journalist versus a non-Black journalist to cover Black artists?
I do, for my specific perspective. I know for sure that it's not for call outs, but some media places, they definitely like how the article is written about the talent is very different depending on who's writing it and who the talent is.
It might also depend on who's reading it, like what the publication is or what the blog is or what the, obviously there's a nuance to what a Black writer would write about or how they would deliver it. But depending on who's reading it, they still might not catch certain things.
Yeah. Also, just being a Black artist and an immigrant refugee, I feel like that always seems to be our only headlines and the only things capable, the only things that can push us up to the forefront when they can be like, oh, refugee artist, da 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 da. Oh, Black artist, why can't I just be
An artist.
hip hop artist so and so from Edmonton?
I think, alluding to that, there's always a certain narrative that wants to be pushed. So a lot of time there's a narrative they already have in mind that they want to push, and it's always not the best, and being able to change the messaging would really help us out as a complete ecosystem. Celebrating our wins as wins for Alberta also. It's always kind of like a us against them, rather than an Albertan drop this album, a Black Albertan drop this album. That the tone of the messaging itself needs to change.
Thank you for that. Ian, do you want to add anything to this? Otherwise, I would like to go into talking about the live space a little bit. All right. Question for all you guys. Do you see Black artists from Alberta represented within the live music space? What are some of the barriers artists are facing to get booked in venues and festivals? Like we already heard from you guys earlier saying that you don't really see us in the festivals, but why is that? Like what is it that's stopping that from happening beyond just saying they're not booking us? Like what do you think what do you think might be some of the challenges and what could be the solution to break down those barriers? Because obviously it was already mentioned that you don't feel like you're seeing you in these spaces. So
Exposure, playing the music. Like I said, even on Calgary radio or Edmonton radio, being able to play some of this music really would change things. Because like, oh wow, I heard this. People pull out Shazam. They Shazam it and like, oh wow, that's an amazing artist. And they're from here. Wow, that's what you hear every time. but making it intentional to play this music. There's a lot of amazing music being created now out here, and pushing that would definitely change things. I think we're one of the very few cities where you barely hear music created here on the radio. That's Calgary specifically.
Yeah, and for a spot, for a place that consumes so much, for so many Black music already, so many artists from everywhere else. You know what I mean? And I know you guys have that problem out east as well, but I think, but at least you guys have radio. Like my song right now is playing on series up Mixtape North. But that's why is there not something similar to out here? That, you know, why is there no radio that are not community radio? Why is it not commercial radio that caters to hip hop music or Black music in general out here? Or at least a show, a segment on these radio stations, you know? And I understand commercial and corporate, and it's obviously like all about the money. But I also think, I don't know, I think some of these like festivals and like live venues just don't want to book us. And I don't know if they're like, I don't know what it is, because they book other caliber artists from different places, and they bring them down here, and they're willing to fly them out and pay their full fee, and, you know, fly them back out and give them the platforms. But then when it comes to Alberta artists that are on this, because I can name a handful or more of Alberta artists that are on similar caliber, exactly, that are on the similar calibers that some of the other artists that are imported. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm just not getting it, you know what I mean? And it's like, it takes people like Femi, or like there's other promoters who do book.
To create the space for you guys to play. I know we used to have like hip hop in the park and a couple of events like that, but who's going to organize that now is kind of the question, right? We don't have that space for that. And even when we're talking about that, there's hip hop and there's urban music, but there's also Black artists that play other genres too. So how do we support them, right?
Yeah.
Are Black rock artists, are you seeing any Black rock artists that are actually being performed on any of these shows that are from Canada, for example? Right. Are you seeing any country artists that are Black? Are you seeing any Black pop artists that are getting booked on these shows? And I guess the question is that because what are I guess the excuses that you guys are facing? Maureen, I think this is probably more, you know, geared towards you in this space, but like, are the excuses have to do? I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. I'm just curious, what are the excuses?
I don't know. I personally think there is no excuses, and they just bluntly don't want to book us. You know what I mean? But, you know, a lot of the times we just get like, I'm a person who does a lot of outreach, and, you know, a lot of times I just get ghosted, but I see other people getting booked for these shows. You know what I mean? It's like, there's no answers. There's no why we're not booking you. So I can go at least work on, and it's not, I know I get it, and it's not their responsibility to give me such constructive feedback. But I straight up just think that they don't want to book us. And a lot, like some of the largest promoters that promote Black music or big Black music events in Alberta are white. Some of the biggest, largest hip hop concerts that come through are not booked through Black promoters, you know? So
I found also, I've observed some of the processes in booking, and I've noticed that often there's only so many spots. You can have a call out to artists and you could get 100 people, but if you only have 10 spots to fill, how do they select who they're like they obviously have a matrix of who they need to sell tickets if that's the goal, who they need to do a favor for, who they need to present, but at what point do you need to say, okay, well, if you're doing this event when you only have 10 spots, you have to book two Black artists? Is that the kind of thing we're looking at doing, or how does that work? And often you have to kind of remind them, because you're going through this list and you're like, okay, they're good, I like their thing. And then those names, sometimes names sort of just drop off, and you've got to remind people, oh, don't forget about this person. Don't forget about this person. And the name, you've got to bring up that name over and over.
Yeah, especially in the artwork, are you really putting, the Alberta artists in the fine print, or are you actually putting them, presenting them like, sorry, Femi.
I was gonna say something quickly.
Yes.
I think it also boils down to the fact that it goes back to that thing of, I think the viewpoints, the general consensus of what people think is, oh, well, you only do music for a pastime, so you're not a real musician. So we'll get someone from the US to do that, and that's the biggest issue we face. And you tell an artist that once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, guess what? They start to believe that. And if we can't get that mentality out of our minds, or out of everyone else's, I would say, we're not going anywhere far. And that's a huge reason why a lot of these artists don't get booked, because they don't think, oh, people are going to pull up for them. So we go get this artist from the US that's about the same level, or even less than the talents that we have here. I think taking our artists more seriously, as musicians, it's a mentality thing, honestly.
And I don't know if that segues maybe into maybe like that incubator program where we need more Black booking agents that can, tackle these events and organizations and just be like, oh, yo, well, I have so-and-so, because I have no problem getting booked elsewhere, but I have a problem getting booked in Alberta sometimes.
Great idea. I think incubators programs are super helpful and can really help push the educational and knowledge base needed to develop professionals in the industry. I guess the challenges from a standpoint of infrastructure, we've talked about the incubator programs, we've talked about mentorships. I also like just to know the absence of the full ecosystem that I've asked before, which I guess also comes back to, is there Black owned venues? Is there Black owned studios? Is there any, right now, obviously, Nilo, with your space, but what does the ecosystem look like in Alberta in that space?
I don't
I'm not
know of
aware.
any. Oh, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know of many Edmonton Black owned venues or run venues. I know that there are some studios, and I don't know if they're public or if it's just the artist has needed to create his own space, their own space to do it, and then it's kind of grown from there. But that's all I know.
I know there is probably a couple venues in Calgary or in Edmonton, and they're clubs rather than live music venues. But there is a few studios.
So to have, I guess, core funding and silo funding to help support these spaces that do exist, or to support the future generations that exist, what would that look like? What type of funding should that come? Where should that come from?
I think the city, depending on the cities need to step in, because it's very key. I feel, especially Calgary, I think socializing gets overlooked, in terms of building community, and these things are important to bring people together to feel like they're from a place. and that gets overlooked tremendously. It's like it's almost like it's a burden. They're like, you do that we can't take that serious. But how are you going to bring people together? How are you going to make people feel like they're part of something, or they, or something bigger? So building that helps. And in Calgary, there are a few spaces Black owned. And to even take it a step further, most places that host Black events are BIPOC owned. All actually, they're owned by other visible minorities. And that's something that I observed very recently. I'm like, oh wow, all these events are held in certain spaces only, and not other spaces. Why is that?
Those other venues will pretty clearly tell you that they don't know what kind of crowd you bring, quote unquote. We know what that means. And I also think that those other spaces will also shy away from hip hop because they think that it brings a certain quote unquote crowd, even though I think like upper class white folks purchase hip hop more than anybody else, I'm pretty sure. So there's some very clear, if as a promoter, like I've tried to do soca in certain venues and they refuse it because they feel like it's going to bring violence, like a certain level of violence, because there's no distinction, but also violence begets violence. I don't really know how what the difference is on that. So I don't know that there's any other spaces in Edmonton that are Black owned venues specifically. Core funding, I literally didn't even know existed until we had a conversation, and then Arlo was like, oh yeah, girl, we got it. But a lot of times there's like, we have rehearsals in the space. Like really when I got the space, it was because I had been it's hard to get space as a Black person in Edmonton, period. Like my business was already popping, had doubled its numbers, all of these things. But even still then, I was gate kept out of Edmonton core. And I was gate kept into very specific areas and into very specific sizes of spaces, which at the time I was looking for 1,000 square feet and I couldn't get that in the downtown core. Yeah, but we do have, I think, a need for that. Bobby was saying that JANA also has a space, the Jamaican Association of Northern Alberta. But obviously the types of events that people want in their spaces and how they feel about that is going to differ, from place to place.
That's a limited space, I think, to a specific, nation or, which is, I think we need something that needs, I think the answer, I think, is no. There's no Black live music venues that are Black owned.
So I want to step in for a moment and ask, because this is a solution oriented panel. So like, I've heard in this conversation that there are no Black owned spaces and there's a lack of opportunity to access other spaces which are not Black owned. So I want to take the conversation back to funding. There's a lot of conversation inside the chat, if you guys are watching it, about self-determination and the creation of infrastructure by the community for the community. And so I think that speaks to a point about funding for entrepreneurship. In Ontario, partially because of the work of Advance as well as BDRB and others, there were, Ontario Creates, for instance, created acceleration, which like BDRB report identified the kind of absences that we're speaking of. Maybe you could speak to what you would like to see in terms of funding for entrepreneurship, for infrastructure, and for racialized and Black people specifically, for studios, for spaces, for venues, 3B, Black owned, Black serving, and Black run. Maybe you can speak to that.
I think there definitely has to be money earmarked for gear. We do the best that we can to like secure the level of quality gear that we possibly can, but when a good microphone's $1,000, that can be very challenging because we're not working with the same amount of expendable income as everyone else is, generational wealth, ABC, all of these things, right? So I think that the equipment portion is a big portion of it. Also accessibility. One of the challenges with my space is that it is on a second floor. So there is a level of accessibility, and I have definitely gone to the city because we do have the structure to be able to put in some accessible lifts in place, but there isn't funding available to make the buildings that we have accessible. I think there's also an idea in terms of how we think about businesses, because Aphrodisiac exists in a hair space. So some people might we kind of generally, as Black folks, do multiple things with a business space that we have. Like you go in, they're selling cell phones, and then we also have different things existing in the same space together. So I think how we do that and how we make our space available, having funding that is, how do you say, not specific to your NAICS code, not specific to whatever the that your business falls into, but really about what it does.
So I think what you're kind of alluding to, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is re-envisioning spaces from a non-colonial standpoint. There are individuals who, from different communities, so emptying your cup and seeing that different communities see spaces or performance venues, et cetera, differently, and that there are opportunities for that creation. However, that has to be fixed into policy for the ability to create the ability for those people to access money for that kind of space. Femi? Sorry, I'm not sure who was first. I didn't see. Maureen. Oh, everybody has up. Sorry, whoever was first, please.
I was gonna say, I think there needs to be the creation of an event space dedicated to Black Albertans to exhibit their work. Yes, to exhibit their work and to be able to showcase their creativity. And it should have all the equipment needed for high quality productions as well. Alluding to what Neil was saying, equipment is so key to be able to produce. If people don't have the tools to create, they're not going to be able to do much.
So should that space be a hub that is multifaceted, that can be used for photography, for videography?
1,000%, yes.
For organizations to come in and do grant funding workshops? How do you envision the space?
It's a modular space. If you have a modular space that can be easily transformed, depending on what type of work is going to be created on that time, right? And maybe probably section it off, but having that ability to convert the space, and that brings about creativity in itself too. How are we going to change this space around? It fosters innovation
and community. Natalie and Maureen.
Maureen was first.
Thank you. I agree with Semi, and it was exactly what I was actually about to say. I've been to obviously different places in the world, and I seen it's not like something that's not tangible. It's something that's very tangible and very possible, because I just did a show at the Notting Hill Arts Club in London, which is a venue that's kind of based around Black music, that's sponsored or supported and funded by Sony Music and all these different labels and organizations in the UK. I know you guys have the Remix project in Toronto, and I know it takes time to work towards that, but I think if we actually do have that space, then it's going to be easier for us to kind of merge as a community, because there's going to be a space available for us to learn how to be an artist, learn how to be in the industry side of being behind the scenes in the industry, how to be a promoter, how to, if we could run, I think a building that has that and has a live venue attached to it as well would be an amazing idea, and I think it could shift the industry in Alberta. And I think if there's obviously like, because Alberta, it can't just be in Edmonton. Yeah, we're talking about Edmonton and Calgary, and there's Red Deer too. But you know, how do we navigate that?
Yeah.
Very cool. Natalie.
I sort of originally, when you asked the question, my thought was, how do we alleviate the pressure on individuals to be the ones to pocket, like have to pay for all this stuff? Because I know that there are people out there that have the idea or to put on shows to support local artists, but in the end, it often comes down to them paying out of pocket, and hopefully they'll recoup the money. So I don't know if there's, I don't know if that falls under projects or if that falls under our incubator ideas that we talked about. My other thing is, what about, is there any way to create positions in organizations that are already existing, but have a department or an ambassador that is focused on this group of individuals to support them? And while they're there, they can also be learning and side by side with people who've been at it, who have that infrastructure and have been there for years and years, because you learn so much. Like I don't have any training. I've learned on the job. So when you're working side by side with somebody, it's you learn a lot and you learn quick, right? You know what works and what doesn't. So I don't know if that kind of helps with mentorship. That helps. You got to have money for it, because a lot of the nonprofit organizations and these music industry organizations, they don't have big staffs, and they have their 5-10-year plan that they have to fill out. And if you need to add more to that, I wouldn't want that project to be at the bottom of the list, like we'll get there. I would rather have some money. These are our objectives, and let's start with that project with that person.
And that's actually a great segue into the final section that we're going to speak about tonight, which would be succession and retention. So we've talked about, like I've heard the words knowledge gap said quite a few times in this panel. I think I've heard education alluded to. I've heard mentorship alluded to. And in the event that we don't fix the problems that we're speaking about in this roundtable, you're going to have people leaving. You're going to have an issue with succession, and you're going to have a problem with retention, of keeping people there, because the only possibility of success is by leaving the province. So I want to ask, what kind of programs could be created? What kind of programs are needed? And what kind of funding behind those programs, for instance, that are for the creation of artists and music professionals in Alberta that align with your peers across the country and worldwide? What do these look like? For instance, we've done a program with the Canadian Consulate, which was a manager's program, which took Black managers to the States. For instance, are there restrictions in your grants, for instance, that say, or could there be things created in your grants that say, you know what, this is for mentorship in LA or in Toronto, et cetera, et cetera? And how do you see these kind of programs and missions rolling out in Alberta? And how could they be beneficial?
Who wants to start?
I guess I have a lot of questions in there.
Sorry. Maybe it's can export and not music itself. But I find that I lived in New York for 16, 17 years. I was pretty involved in the underground, very specific underground hip hop community out there. And Edmonton's talent, per capita, is so high in terms of who reaches the stage and who gets on. I think that some of the things that are missing are likely things that we could get in other markets, like in the States particularly, or even Albertans in Toronto. And I also think it has to be like a cultural exchange type of a thing where yes, you're going to learn over there XYZ, but there also has to be something that the artist or the person's also contributing, which allows, like, I guess, for the longevity of the relationship, because I think we always have this like subjugated view of Canada and our music business as it relates to the United States. And I would like, it makes me uncomfortable to be like, oh, we have to go to America to learn how they do it. But I think that if it was like an exchange, like that would benefit
I
the
I,
artist.
I think that's a great idea, and that's actually one of the first times I've ever heard that mentioned in that way here, in these conversations that we had. And I think that the idea that you're talking about is not necessarily about sending somebody away so that they can leave Alberta. It's more like going somewhere where they can get the tools and knowledge and relationships and network that will help benefit them, so that when they go back to Edmonton, they've come with an arsenal to be able to, like, you know, uplift their community and uplift their careers. It's a great idea. It's a great program idea.
Sorry, sorry,
Oh.
Natalie. You know, to your point about being in spaces, there are things that can be replicated from other industries. So in Toronto, for instance, we have a Black film office. You were talking about spaces within spaces. So there's a Black film office at the City of Toronto, although there is a film office. There's a Black music office. Like, these are the kind of ideas that that can be implemented, to your point. Sorry, Cliff, go ahead.
It's okay. Natalie, you want to add to this question that Ian had? Or come back to you?
Come back to me, please.
Femi?
I think I'll give you an example. I was just in LA this past weekend on a group called Amplify Africa, based in LA. They put together a convention called Africon, and I helped them in terms of producing part of it. And I could tell you the amount of networking I was exposed to was priceless. You know, there was a lot of people that that there's probably no other way of me ever reaching those people, you know, directly, that, you know, and getting that knowledge firsthand right there, than that opportunity. So it's exposure and understanding how big the world is and how the world really works outside of this bubble does help.
So are you basically saying a program that would allow for Black Albertans to be able to go to other events to network?
Network, 100%.
That don't
Yeah.
maybe don't even have an artist attached to them, just the power and availability to go to another place to actually build and network would be a program that we taught. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, if there is some type of grant that allows people to attend conventions or different expos around North America or even Europe, the UK, for example, is a really good one. You know, there's a lot happening in the UK, and I feel the UK is essentially what we can essentially look at the UK for what Canada could become when it comes to music. You look at things like BBC Radio 1 and all these things, right, that came together. We don't have anything like that here, but look at the impact it's had on British music in the past 15
Well,
to 20 years.
we do have things like that here, and I think that's part of it is people don't realize, like CBC The Block was created specifically as a Canadian, all across Canada. You can get that. The one that you were talking about, Moraine, Sirius XM, is actually Canadian, all available all across Canada, the Northern Mixtape. You know what I mean? That those are all in the same nature of what you're talking about Radio 1 is. They just are new things that are built that haven't reached Radio 1 status yet. You know what I mean?
I get you.
Moraine, do you have any program ideas you want to add to answer Ian's question?
No, I think I definitely lean towards the incubators. I think that you know, maybe that could also be tied to it, where, you know, they also can help you fund a trip to some of these, because I'm fortunate enough to be like as an artist, I got the chance to like go to different conferences all across. That's my mom's Instagram, if you can see. But yeah, I had the chance to check out like New School Rules in Rotterdam. I just came from the Great Escape, Focus Field, just all these different conferences where I was able to network and actually meet playmakers in industries that are now familiar with who I am, because I was able to be there face to face and shake hands. And I think having more of that, like Femi said, like people that are just professionals that just want to explore going into the music industry, if they had some type of access to a fund that would take them there, maybe they go and they find a job at Sony Music and they can come back and uplift Alberta's artists and communities. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be Sony or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's just, I
Gotcha.
agree. That's all I'm trying to say. I agree.
Natalie, you're the last one, and then we're gonna go to some Q&As. So
I think for me, it's networking is huge, because even just observing what happened when the Junos were here this last spring, when it was here, there was a buzz. And when you left, there were people inspired to try different things and do different things. I'm a big fan of panels and workshops and things like that, and just getting people in the same room, like even like this, just to talk about things, their experiences and sharing. So anything like that, just the learning part and the infrastructure are my big things. And just, I guess, educating people too. I have a question. Can I ask a quick question?
Mhm.
Is there any need for a database or a listing of all the Black artists and all, whether it's artists, professionals, anything like that? Like, I feel there's no one space that has nailed that yet.
100%.
I think that that's an idea. That's a solution you just brought to the table. I think that those things definitely help. I know for a fact that a couple of years ago, there was a bunch of directories that were created that were very Ontario based, that were
Yeah.
floating all around, that really helped, and I think that it also builds community, like people starting to know, oh, you do that, I didn't know I do this. And it's like, it sometimes takes
A
us
while.
supporting each other to realize that we exist and how powerful we are.
Yeah. Or that you're in this part of the country and I'm here, but we still do the same thing. Yeah. Okay. That was my idea.
Awesome. Nilo?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the radio portion of it. Like, we have been actively trying to get a number on the dial for like the last 5 years or so, which is how we ended up on community radio station. And straight up, they tell us like there's no frequency available for us. So wherever the gatekeeping for, like, a lot of us have talked about, like, on this thing, having radio, yes, having radio play us, but having our own radio station to be able to have our own programming so that we can have a country hour. Like, even though there's a gospel radio station, there's no Black gospel on the radio, things like that. We just, from like the highest level, are being gate kept out of that very specific space.
There's this.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Click.
no, go ahead, Ian. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, you're not the only one. That's pretty much the lay of the land in Canada, period. There's Black radio is pretty non-existent. Black artists on commercial radio is pretty non-existent, besides maybe Flow in Toronto. But what I will say, and we'll hopefully get in more into this conversation on Thursday, is just, the lay of the land when it comes to social media and comes to DSPs, and how that world exists for Alberta and what that looks like. You know what I mean? Because let's be frank, that's where a lot of our artists are actually cutting through, right? The question is, are we cutting through in Alberta? Do you know what I mean? And how is that helping? Right. But Ian, I believe you had a couple of questions you wanted to answer from Rudy live. So there was a Q&A that you addressed in the chat that you wanted to answer.
So Rudy had asked a question with respect to the effect of not taking handouts and doing it ourselves to recreate our own sustainable ecosystems and environments. So my answer to you, Rudy, and I'll throw this to the panel, is that it's not an either or, it's not a zero sum. We pay taxes in the society and have a right to access systems. And that right to access systems equals the ability to access money to do things ourselves, to create community-based businesses and organizations which receive the same and equal funding as their Eurocentric partner peers in ballet or theater or wherever the case may be, that our artists get the same respect as the Group of Seven, or like our dance forms get the same respect as, you know, et cetera, but also to be able to get jobs and get positions within spaces that we also want to be in. So it's, for me, it's not a zero sum, but I think that one of the things that we really didn't get to, and I think we'll get to in part two, is the creation of infrastructure for us, by us. And I mentioned, you know, the 3Bs, Black serving, Black led, and Black owned earlier, and the creation of siloed funding, for instance, for those kind of things. Anyone want to touch in?
I do. I wanted to say, like, to your point of exactly what you said, number one, like, we have to be able to learn. And in order to learn, we have to be in the room, not to like be kitschy, but also at the table in order to like learn those things. Additionally, I think there's like this bootstrap mentality that's not real. Like, our counterparts are not doing it themselves. They are not building something sustainable from scratch, not CBC all the way down. Like, so I think it's really important. Like, we have a problem asking and putting our hands out for things as folks, either because we don't feel Canadian enough, or we don't feel like, you know, an integrated part of society, which is the nature of being Black in Canada. And I think it's important to realize that like anybody who is like on that successful level is getting that support, and what we're asking for is not above and beyond what our counterparts are already receiving.
Of course. So I'm going to some of these questions that are in the Q&A, and if anybody else in the chat has some, please put them in the Q&A for us. But Natalie, there's a question from Bobby here. How can Black-led, Black-serving organizations form meaningful partnerships with large platforms like the Edmonton Jazz Festival? What can we do to help solve some of the festival problems while channeling resources from the festival specifically to develop jazz music in Black Canadians and Edmontonians?
Didn't like, I don't know if it happened in Edmonton, but like jazz music festivals across the board generally continually get in trouble for like gatekeeping Black people out of them. So I'm not even sure if it's a matter of like developing the artists, but I think white folks at some point, and maybe it's history, like maybe we need to have a history lesson in school so folks know where jazz actually came from, because you know, I truly believe it's like rooted in that part. Like, people really think rock and roll is like white music. It's weird.
There is education that needs to happen about it, but I know that like from my experience, like if you look at our lineups over the last 15 years, it's not like Black artists are left out of it. A lot of our bookings often happen from who's touring during this period of time and who all the festivals are trying to route. It's tricky because would I like to see more Black groups from, see, and now I'm going out of the province. Would it be nice to see groups from New York or Chicago or in the States come here so that people can experience that and see that? Is it building here, like you said, but at the same time, I don't know how many I personally don't know how many Black musicians play jazz. So then there's that outreach to try and go find them. And are they putting a band together? How can we put this band together, and how can we get them prepared and to the level that they need to be to get into this festival? And you know, we've had a lot of talks in our organization too. It's like we need to kind of focus a little bit of attention on the younger generation to introduce them to jazz, to teach them about music. Like the music programs are not the same as they used to be. You know, they don't have the support they used to. So in coming up, it's like, well, you play your instrument and then it might be that might be all you know of and it's done. But how do we get those young kids to play it, to buy it, to teach it, to, you know, to kind of do that? I don't know if that answers Bobby's question.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, I think Bobby's question kind of also, you're already doing it kind of. Maybe you can elaborate, like, how did you and Arlo come up with this event that's happening with the Jazz Festival right now? Like, it's like, that's what he's asking, is like, how are these things coming together? Like, how do you align with Black, you know, with Black Canadians and Edmontonians to be involved in the Jazz Festival? And you're already like, maybe you could talk about that.
This project came about. Arlo was booked for the Jazz Festival last summer in a space that my boss or the producer didn't feel like it fit. It was an outdoor thing. It was a lunch hour thing, and it wasn't necessarily something he felt was the right fit. So he wanted to give him another opportunity. And I'm always trying to encourage, you know, putting the artist in the right space and trying to really connect. And I talked to Arlo and I was like, you know what, it would be really cool if we could somehow bring hip hop and jazz together. And how can we make this, you know, more than just a show for a single artist? How can we do this? And we just talked about it and we came up with some ideas, and I said, you know what, I trust you, go for it. And we brought the idea back to the producer and he's like, you know what, I have the space, let's use it and let's do it. And he was totally supportive. So you know, like, you have to have the people who will believe and give you that opportunity. And I know, like, with our festival, we do have access to the space sometimes, but not everybody does. So yeah, that's how it happened. But Arlo's been great. I'm totally excited about it. I think it'll be awesome. Just saying, there's my plug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see too many other questions here. Just comments. Unless
Maureen, did you have your hand up?
No, I was just trying to ask you a question. And I was like, well, if you weren't in that space, was Arlo going to have the opportunity to do that? And if he would have went to the produce or somebody else at another festival, would he still have that trust?
I don't
and
know.
that's why I personally think that we need to be in these spaces so that, you know, like, yeah.
Because I can continue to bring
You can
things up.
Move it on to the right people instead of, like, you know, there's been a lot of times where I find myself in, like, general inboxes and no replies ever.
Right.
So
yeah. And that goes back to the whole relationships, right? Right. Like go ahead, Ian.
you're muted.
And it goes to, it's a representation issue, right? And until the grant funding for spaces and festivals and organization is tied to their diversity efforts, their equity efforts, there is not going to be any substantive change in the way that things are done. The only thing that moves the dial, unfortunately, is money, right? It's the right thing to do. We're losing so much intellectual property and creativity, but the bottom line is that by excluding people's prejudices are going to cost them substantial amounts of money. In the event that we don't tie their equity efforts, 2026, to your point, Femi, 2023, 2026, 2030, this amount, nothing is going to change. So, yeah.
We have a question, a hand up from, I think it's Jess, actually.
Hey, it's me. I just wanted to let you know about, there was a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
It's Rewell asked, from which vantage point is change more effective, boards, juries, or communities?
Good question. What do you guys think?
All?
Moraine?
All the above.
I would say from the high, whichever one you consider is the highest vantage point.
You know what? I would say it's time for the talk to change right now. I agree with you guys that it's all, but I think being one of the roots in the grassroots of this business, we have done a lot of work. Even Arlo has on his 2 feet and on his back done a lot of work. Natalie in the space that she's in has done a lot of work. And it's daunting that like to be an artist, you also have to be a diversity and inclusion expert, like to be in, like to be Black. It is a lot of work. And I think that I have seen the level of talent in Alberta raise amongst the Black collective in Alberta. I've seen networking. I've seen the quality of events that are being put on be increased. I've seen videos, song production, all of those things. I think we're at a point where I personally need to see that change reflected in the top.
Ian, you were saying policy change. Maybe you can explain why you believe that's important.
Because when something is put into policy, it has to be done. Those are the things that, when we're talking about systemic racism, we're talking about things that impact the entire system. Until the systems themselves are changed, and have a trickle down effect. If it's written that you must do this in order to get this, you have to do it, or else you don't get this.
And who do you have to go to get those policies changed then?
Well, so I mean, ultimately, we're talking about you're talking about restructuring boards, restructuring the policies, the organizations, strat plans for the next 5 to 10 years, that actually prioritize these words that we're using: mandate, priority,
Accountability.
yeah,
Accountability. Yeah.
like, basically it's accountability, right? We have said that we are going to do this by 2026. Where are we against that benchmark? We have said that we're going to do this by 2029. Where are we against that?
And this is why this conversation, which I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, we're coming to an end, but this is why this conversation is important, because we're actually the community, and we're the ones that enforce those boards and those spaces, that we have a voice that needs to be heard, and we also dictate what we want to see done, because it is our funding, our taxpayer funding, that allows that to exist, right? So it is all, like you said, but that's how it works. You could build a community, but the community's got to be this built strong and understand and move in alliance for the bigger cause, right?
Yeah, I think we also have to remember, like everybody who's on this panel now and anybody who has ever been in a room has had to be excellent to get there. And freedom is not about having your excellent music to be able to make it. Freedom is being able to make terrible music, and because an artist is an artist. The fact that you have to like be so excellent in order to like get the basic minimum, like at some point, can we be mediocre, like at any point?
So you're actually making a
Yeah.
joke. However, it's critical that we are allowed to have the ability to make the same mistakes as everybody else in society has. That is from the organizational, give us the money, let us mess it up. Companies and organizations have been given money and allowed to mess it up for decades.
Mm-hmm.
People have been funded to do music festivals that have failed for decades. People have been given money to produce albums that sold 4 copies and went double chocolate for decades, right? So we as a community have to be given the ability to ramp up, right? To receive funding, to receive access, to receive outreach, and it not take immediately And if it doesn't work, we say, well, that's why we didn't do it in the first place, because there's no need for it. There's no.
We deserve the time
Yeah.
to have that process, go
Yeah.
through that process.
Another
for
thing
sure.
is, I think like content wise, I think when like even like trying to write up, say a grant, they want to hear you talk about, oh, I'm gonna address this issue about systemic racism about my music in my music, but I don't want to do that. What if I just want to rap? What if I just want to make a song a good song? What if I just want to make a good song that anybody can hear and doesn't necessarily have to challenge anything?
Right.
Why is my access to the funding only if I'm sitting there and crying on a record rather than me making a nice dance record that everyone
It's
can
the
enjoy?
measure of success.
Yeah.
What's
and
the measure of success?
I think to Nilo's point earlier about the jazz festivals, right? There has been a colonial standard by which we have been judged and have now accepted ourselves as being judged. And to like my personal theory on the jazz festivals themselves is that they actually took the soul out of the festival. And when they took the soul out of the festival, it started to fail. And consequently, they started having to bring in genres that are not jazz into the space because specifically, and when you talk about Little Nas X not looking like country music, or this person not looking like jazz, or this ballerina not looking like, because her hair is an afro. This is what we're talking about. Nilo, sorry.
No, you're right. I was gonna say even Beyonce, but you know.
Esma, you have one thing you want to say? I don't think we have room to answer any more questions, but
Oh, I was just gonna say if we could do rapid fire, because I know a lot of people have been waiting. There's 6 questions that
there are where
in the Q&A. If you just want to do rapid fire and just like one person answers, then we can wrap it up.
Yep. Okay, go ahead, Cliff.
I won't let all of you answer this. The first one to raise their hand, just answer it. What role can white-owned studios play in helping develop Black-owned studios? What role can a white-owned studio play in helping develop a Black-owned studio?
Yellow. You're
Muted.
muted.
You did.
I feel like that's a question you can probably pay somebody to answer. I think that is the labor that is necessary and the work for you to do. I'm not sure just answering it on this panel is possible, but I do think that the answers are out there. And you can, yeah, that's what I would say.
Conversations.
I'm actually going to intervene there as well. Look at your organization, right? Look at the companies that you spend money with and the partnerships that you make. You can spend money in the Black community by partnering on projects and hiring engineers and teaching people this is what that allyship looks like. That is that mentorship point that we're talking about when there is a lack of infrastructure in a place like Alberta.
Another question: do any of you believe that the major festival producers who weren't supporting DEI and anti-racism pre BLM and George Floyd are sincere about DEI and anti-racism now? I guess so. I guess if they weren't supporting it before and now they're doing something,
We'll never know. We'll never know. We can't judge what's in somebody's heart.
Exactly. What would be your end of year goal for everyone here in terms of representation? What would you like to see by the end of this year, I guess?
Individually?
Yeah, I guess.
Or as a group?
Oh, well, okay, so let's do it this way.
That's a tough question.
Each one pick a space.
Yeah. Maureen, go.
Sorry, no, I just think I think action, plan of action needs to start.
Good answer.
More content, more Black Alberta content in media specifically.
Another question is, are there other Alberta-based award shows? I think we asked that question before. There was nothing else besides the Music Award and Calgary Music Award. I mean,
there's Black Connection. They do. They throw Afro event in Edmonton that did do kind of like a Afro Music Awards, kind of. I forget the name of it, but it was Black Connection All Awards. But yeah,
Oh, I think there's also the
but it wasn't
Oscars.
just based on music, but they had
Okay.
a, yeah.
There's also the Oscars Festival, not
Okay.
film festival, Oscars Festival.
And if somebody had a jazz single, or I guess just somebody had wanted to produce a single, where would they seek funding? Where would they even start? I guess Alberta. What are the different spaces in Alberta to access funding to make music?
Edmonton Arts Council, Alberta Foundation for the Arts. Well, Factors Canadian, but Edmonton Community Fund.
And isn't there a
think also
Calgary
supports that.
development, Calgary art development?
Calgary Arts Development as well. So there's
Yeah.
Edmonton Arts Council, that's for Edmonton, and then there's the Calgary Arts Development, it's for Calgary. And then there's the Alberta Foundation for the arts, and that usually post music. That's like marketing and access to that kind of money.
So would like to end with just each one of you just sharing a final thought, or even sharing a solution that you want to bring back up, or what might be your single largest barrier for yourself, and how you would like to see it. This space and what we've created here is for us to put our souls, I guess, on the line and say, hey, what are the changes we want to see, and not just saying it, but actually following through with the stakeholders that exist to implement the type of changes we're talking about and to create the things that we're asking for. So I'm going to start with Femi.
Yes, so it's kind of what I just mentioned. I think media coverage. There's a lot of people doing amazing things every day out here, and a lot of times these things get overlooked and they don't get the right coverage that they need. And giving people that level of media coverage, it changes the conversation, because now that random person that never had any idea of who you were might have been listening to radio, like, wow, that's some amazing stuff. I think I know someone that I need to connect them with. You know, just having that exposure in general, I think would really benefit us all as a province.
Nilo.
I think core funding to be an artist, to like just live and be able to create your art. I think that's the major thing. I think there has to be some representation on the boards and on the juries so that they understand what they're seeing. Yeah.
Moraine.
I think a lot more outreach, more connections to bridging the gap, and more collaboration between these big organizations in the community. You know, bringing in Femi to do an event at actually Stampede would actually make a big difference in our. If they were to offer him the actual big stage at Stampede, would be a huge thing. And you know what I mean? And yeah, collaboration.
Natalie.
I'd probably say, just getting people to make the effort and take the time to have these conversations and keep them going, and to follow through, have some sort of action item at the end of your conversation, or some sort of goal that you can actually work on. Don't just let it fall at the wayside. And speaking of your sessions there, Moraine, it would be neat if some of these concerts or big events that you guys are producing have panels, have a half an hour, have 45 minutes where these artists can share and teach and talk about things and just learn, because you've got people coming there already. So
I would like to thank Factor, SEMA, Canadian Independent Music Association, Advance, and obviously Alberta Music for stepping up, for creating this opportunity for us to come together and speak about our truths and our experiences and our perspectives and our ideologies and our theories and all that good ish, but I'm really grateful to share this time, and I know it's been a lot of time. We had a a slippery slide coming in, but we made it. So I want to thank everybody that's also joined us in the chat. And we have another session on Thursday, the same time, 6 p.m. MST time, Mountain Standard Time. Please tell everybody. I think this is an important conversation. And if there's it's been amazing to see the comments that have come up in the chat. It's been amazing to have it's very important. And if you see individuals that aren't here, those are the people that need to be here, right? So especially from other organizations, Alberta Music, thank you for sending this out as far as you can, but we can't rely strictly on Alberta Music. You already know this. We have to unify as a community to get the word out and to make a statement. So thank you. Ian, any last remarks?
Thank you so much.
Yes, and that's it.